It looks like we are back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Break F1 YouTube channel. We are going into the 2023 Qatar Grand Prix qualifying. You guys that were hanging out during the watch long, welcome back. Glad to have you. So here's what we're going to get into. We're going to get into a general session summary, like some of the overall talking points. We're not going to dig in too much into the drama and the details. This is going to be heavily focused on the data and objective assessments, maybe a little bit of joking around. Then I'll get into like a performance too long didn't read type thing. And then for the nerds that really like the geeky data stuff, we can dig super deep into the telemetry, where people were fast, where people were slow, and just really share my thoughts on the session with you guys. I think it was pretty straightforward, but there's a couple very interesting things that I think you'll appreciate. And for those of you that are hanging out live on stream, feel free to hang out after we finish up the discussion bits, because then we'll dig straight back into some of your questions and discuss some thoughts and hang out for a little bit. And if you like the data and you want a little bit more of this stuff, do be sure to check out the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. So let's get straight into it. So this was honestly a super chaotic session. Wind, a huge factor, huge ramp up in the track grip, because there's basically, I don't think there's any support series at all. The track was dusty. Lots of track limits violations causing people to lose their lap times, which is never fun. Verstappen, Russell, Hamilton, top three after both of the McLarens were knocked out for track limits. And Piastri gets told that he's talking to Naomi Schiff, and Piastri gets told that he's dropped while he finishes his interview for P3. And it's like, all right, see you later. Norris drops down to P10 because he does not set a lap time in Q3. Verstappen, 4/10 clear of Russell. And there were a few pretty interesting or not interesting or surprising or not surprising knockouts. Stroll doesn't make Q2. Perez doesn't make Q3. It's his 8th Q3 missed this season, if I recall correctly. Yikes. Qualifying in windy sessions like this is all about knowing where the wind's going to screw you up and taking margins appropriately in those places. A small snap at the apex of the corner can displace the car when you correct by, over a car width. So if you're already on the limit and you have a snap, you're done. I will say track limits on this circuit are kind of crap, and I think we kind of need to think about this, because like in so many instances, especially on this track, if you have a snap and you go off limits, you will not go faster. And yes, the people have snaps because they're trying to keep it in track limits. So if they push outside of the track limits and abuse the track limits, and you can go faster that way, that means there's something wrong with the track. And I really find this track limit system quite frustrating. I don't know what you guys think, but that's my take on it. I think the tracks should be designed that if you go slower, if you go off track, so gravel, grasscrete, which is like some latticed concrete with grass in between it, which is relatively low grip. And then just a heads up, when we look at the performance data below, I'm going to be referencing lap times, and some of those lap times and laps that I'm referencing are from the deleted laps. So based on what I've said above, I don't think people were not gaining performance by going off track. They were going slower from correcting from snaps. So including the McLaren laps, I think is completely valid. So let's shift over to the performance TLDR, and I figure like this is the super top level if you want to know the nuts and the details, or the headline items, and we'll get into the details below and talk through it. Red Bull superior high speed performance, turn 12 to 14. Literally, I mean, Perez and Verstappen were super close here, and if you're saying that, it's like, well, then where was Perez slow? We'll come back to that. Perez lost most of his time in Q2 from what I can see from the telemetry, and there are some caveats to using the telemetry to assess these finer details, which I'll get back to, but it looked like Perez was doing a thing where he was basically over pushing the medium and low speed corner entries and losing out on the exits. His high speed performance was great. So yeah, we'll come back to that. We'll look at Verstappen versus Perez's Q2 laps. McLaren, definitely stronger than Mercedes everywhere except for Sector 2. McLaren is also similar top speed to Mercedes. So I think in terms of the playing field, in terms of single lap outright pace, they're quite even in terms of raceability, but I think McLaren have a little bit better pace outright. And McLaren are the second fastest medium speed corner car, which is where a lot of lap time on this circuit comes from. Alonso, also very high speed very strong high-speed performance. He was the second fastest car in the high-speed segments, maybe next to Perez. But generally, it looked like his lap, he was just lacking pace in the first sector. So I don't know if it was tire preparation or he wasn't confident pushing in the first sector. But I think we could have seen a little bit more from Alonso in the Aston. Next thing is Ferrari is down in top speed, so they have more drag and downforce on their car, but they also had super poor high-speed performance. So there were some caveats or some anecdotal expressions that maybe Ferrari struggles in high wind conditions, and I can't confirm or deny it, but it sounds like a very plausible thing. Like all of a sudden it's windy as hell, and they're starting to lose performance. So let's just quickly look at the overall, high speed, or the overall season qualifying performance. And this is, now that we've got 18 races on this chart, it's a little bit chaotic to see, but there's a couple interesting takeaways. The closer you are to the bottom of this chart, the faster your team is. And again, we've got Red Bull setting a very huge gap to McLaren. McLaren, the second car for the second week in a row. Usually they're thereabouts. Ferrari have taken a relative drop in performance. Last week at Japan, or the previous race at Japan, Mercedes did struggle quite a bit there because it was kind of like we need efficiency and downforce. So they're struggling. Aston could have been a bit closer, but I think Ferrari kind of the big losers of today, honestly. But yeah, I didn't. Everybody that got knocked out in Q2 are quite far back, and we'll have a look at that again in just a second. Outright qualifying results, we do have the pattern. Verstappen, Russell, Hamilton are your top three, even though we didn't know. Alonso P4, Leclerc P5, Piastri has been dropped to P6. Gazman and Ocon up in Q3. Bottas makes it through to P9. And Lando in 10th. He did not set a time in Q3. And if you want to see like exactly how much lap time this track ramped up, this is what we're looking at. Like the first lap time was 127, and they're finishing in 123s. So I mean, this is 126. So 3 seconds of track improvement through qualifying is huge. I think Japan was about just over a second, around a second. So that's one of those things that makes qualifying sessions like this super interesting, because you have to take big chunks every time you set another lap on a tire. Every time you've got to be anticipating the grip improvement. And yeah, if you notice here, Max doesn't have a second run in Q3. It's because he aborted it. But yeah, like when you have huge track improvement like that, that makes the sessions chaotic. Mix that with some wind. The only interesting thing we saw actually was Mercedes started off on a scrubbed medium at the start of the session. So a couple of the fast cars going out on scrubbed tires at the beginning. Everybody else went straight on to a fresh tire. I was looking at the tire usage, and I put something on Twitter about the rules about sprint qualifying tires. I think everybody has at least one new soft. I am not sure that the soft will be favored for the race. So I think that's pretty much it. If we look at the drivers, if they put together their perfect sectors, I think this is a pretty interesting one to look at. Norris actually had quite a bit of time if he put his best sectors together all in the same lap. Not too bad, a 10th off Max if he'd put the perfect sectors together. Russell's perfect sectors would have put him ahead of Russell. And no other big changes through the lap if everybody puts their perfects together. So I think it was just one of those things that you have huge track evolution. The people getting knocked out in Q2 have a huge gap to the people that make it to Q3. Yeah. In terms of top speeds, I think it looks something like this. Red Bull and Ferrari are probably one of the more competitive top speed cars at the sharp end. Alonso also on par with the Aston Martins, are on pace with the Red Bulls in terms of top speed. They just don't have the outright pace. And then your next competitive group is Ferrari, a little bit faster, but slower than the McLarens and Mercedes. And the Mercedes, one of the slowest competitive cars in a straight line. So, yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting way to put it. So let's quickly, that's kind of like the overall performance summary. But now I want to look into some of the telemetry of our top 5, 6 fastest teams. F1 Stats Guru, hello brother, how you doing? And let's just have a quick dig into this real quick and look at who is fast, who is slow. And the interesting thing is, if you simulated this car for each, car characteristic, the McLaren, the Red Bull, you would not get these results. You've got the drivers in super tricky conditions trying to put together a good lap. And the conclusions that we can draw about the car performance I think there's some strong conclusions we can make, but they're not the whole picture. It's all circumstance and what we can observe. So let's look at this. I think I can use this one here. Nope. I gotta go back to this. So let's look at this. This is Verstappen in blue. Verstappen in blue again this week, and Norris in red. And here's the telemetry. If you haven't looked at these before, I'll quickly describe it. But for the most part, I will do my best to describe to you what you should be taking away from it. If you want to go back and watch this and study it, great. And if you want to dig in even more, even deeper, check out the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. And I think you will find that there's a lot of value in that. I post free stuff all the time, but basically every qualifying and race members get that. So for the price of a coffee a month, I think there's a lot of really, really high level, objective Formula One analysis that you don't get too many places. So I think you'll hopefully find some value on that. We've crossed over 400 members. So there's a lot of people that have been supporting that project for a very long time, and it keeps growing because I think the value's there for you guys. So anyway, enough on that plug. Verstappen blue, Norris in red. The top one is the car speed trace. Here's your throttle, here's your DRS, and here's the lap time delta. If the line moves towards the top, that means Norris or Verstappen's gaining. And if it moves towards the bottom, that means that Norris is gained. Here's the start of the lap on the left and the end of the lap on the right. So you can see here, accelerating down the straight, braking into turn one. Verstappen just has a little bit better DRS or a slight toe compared to Norris. Norris gets a really good drive out of a lot of these corners. You can see Norris earlier on throttle here and here. A little bit of telemetry offset, but Max starts really taking the hammer to him at turn 4-5. Really, really strong high-speed performances, of above 200 kilometers an hour. I call a high-speed corner. There's only really one low-speed corner on this track. Everything else is medium speed, and that's turn 6. Norris was strong here, carried a lot of speed, and to be fair, the McLaren has been not as strong recently in low speed, but here, faster than the Red Bull through that. And this is turn 4-5 here is where we need to look at, because this is where a lot of people had issues with track limits. Again, Max not so strong in turn 7. It's a medium, mid of the range, medium speed corner. Again, Norris has a bad exit out of turn 10, and that honestly, this turn 9-10 segment loses Norris about 0.2, and then as expected, turn 12 to 14 Max is absolutely flying through here. And yes, as we've always said, you don't gain that much time by going 5-10 kilometers an hour faster through a high-speed corner. But when the high-speed corner lasts effectively half a kilometer, turn 12, 13, 14 is basically half a kilometer from entry to exit. You're going to gain some lap time if you're carrying 5 to 10 clicks more through there. And then Max really not super strong in the turn 16. So Lando very strong in the medium speed. Pretty competitive car. That being said, Max did not second Q3 time, but this is what we've got to work with, and I think that's kind of a good summary. But a great lap by Norris. And here's the Mercedes, and I think this is where we're struggling. And Jacob's got an interesting question. He says, how are Mercedes staying so consistent and fighting for P2 when their car is, quote, bad? And I think that's a fair assessment. Their car is not particularly competitive, but I think sometimes we don't see one of them get the most out of it. But for the most part, Lewis and George are also very close often, and they're getting as much as they can out of it more frequently than other people. And I've said this multiple times. I think George and Lewis is the strongest driver pairing on the grid, the best sum. I think that might be seconded by potentially Piastri and Norris, but I mean, that combo is strong. I think that's a super strong combo and a relatively mature combination. So let's look at Verstappen and Russell's laps. Again, we said that the Mercedes was slow in straight line. You can see that here, and you can see it everywhere. DRS on, DRS off. Verstappen has probably 4 kilometers an hour advantage on him. So by turn 1, Verstappen's up a tenth and a half. Russell good in the medium speed to turn 1, turn 2. Max not really pushing a whole lot turn 1, 2. Honestly, like I think Max left quite a bit on the table there. But this is what we're looking at. It's like kind of what I said, leading into this, is like we don't see the outright performance of the car. We see the combination of car and driver, and we can't ever separate the two. But when you have drivers performing quite consistently, like Max, you can say, okay. Turn 4, 5, Verstappen finds, a bit of time over him here. Then you can see George is actually pretty good here. And this lap time difference, there's something wrong with the data here. Like you can see how the throttle comes off slow. There's something up with Russell's data, but Russell through turn 7 doesn't really lose much, and he actually, if that's correct, gets a good exit. Russell keeps his foot in it through that kink of turn 9, and then gets a slightly better drive than Max through turn 10. But again, look at this. We go from Max a tenth up entering turn 12, and then once we exit turn 15, Max is literally, he's found 3/10 on Russell, and Russell gets a very competitive turn 16. So looking at that overall, I would say Red Bull didn't get the most out of the medium speed corners, and maybe that's partly because they didn't do a second run, or they just didn't optimize that. I think there by far, we've seen this trend pretty much everywhere. Max is absolutely obliterating people in the very high speed. This is a 250 kilometer an hour corner. And it's this big flowing thing. Look at the throttle trace here. Like Max doesn't lift through the entry here. Russell has a little tiny lift of the throttle. Verstappen just kind of feeding it in, balancing the car, because you've basically got to be just inch perfect around those 3 apexes. So super, super good. Interesting comment about the not overheating the tires comment from Sabu. That's an interesting one, because I can't really tell from looking at this outright rather than the comments. I can't really tell that people were struggling with like overheating in sector 3, for example. So, Bonus Druthers says something about a chimichurri steak. Chimichurri and steak is phenomenal. I hope it's ribeye or another delicious cut. And the final one that I want to look at before we get into some of the teammate compares, especially the guys that got knocked out in Q1 and Q2, I want to look quickly at Verstappen and Alonso, because I think that's an interesting tale, and I'm not really sure what's going on here, to be fair. So it looks to me, Alonso and red, Alonso gives up quite a bit through the first 2 corners. Alonso's 2/10 down. He gets a better drive out of 2. Max wasn't particularly optimized in turn 2 on his drive out. The medium high speed, these are high speed here, over 200 kilometers an hour. Verstappen basically finds another 2/10 over Alonso here. But then the low speed stuff, Alonso's pretty good. Again, turn 7, not ideal. And then he loses out a little bit on the medium speed turn 10. But look at this. Alonso actually very, very strong in the first 2 corners of the turn 12 to 14 combination. And Max just keeps a little bit more of a foot in through 14. Alonso probably has to back out of that, or maybe that's a snap because he's fully off the throttle. Alonso competitive through 15, and again, Alonso competitive at 16. So unless everybody was struggling with the same amount of overheating at the end of the lap, I don't know if we were absolutely nuking these tires on a single push lap. But the Aston Martin strong on the downforce front in high speed, which is interesting. If you go watch my Aston Martin video that I published last week, there's some interesting conclusions in that. I recommend that you check that video out after this if you haven't already. So let's get on to we got Leclerc as well, and I've got an interesting comment. F1 Stats Guru asks, are Ferrari having troubles in the second and third sector? Their steering rotation didn't seem as uniform around the high speed corners compared to Alonso. It felt a bit jerky too. Let's look at the data. Then I'm going to come back and answer some anecdote and some suggestions on what it could be. Without doing a side-by-side and showing the video, I would love to be able to do the side-by-side videos, like the El Skypad kind of thing on stream. But unfortunately, I will, I'll get DMCA'd for that. So, but to that point, let's go in and check out Verstappen versus Leclerc. I mean, where did Leclerc qualify? In terms of pace, Leclerc was like something like what, 8th? And then in terms of actual qualifying, Uh, P5. Yeah, so not a particularly strong. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Leclerc was 7th outright pace. Not much in his perfect sectors, so let's look into that. So here's Verstappen versus Leclerc. Leclerc in red. Great. Again, Red Bull, a little bit stronger DRS open. Ferrari actually surprisingly faster DRS off. It could have been a toe or something else. I really don't know. But it looks like maybe Red Bull just have a slightly better DRS than Ferrari. Through the lap, Verstappen faster through turn 1, 2, faster through 4, 5. Leclerc, like Max was not particularly strong in turn 6, 7 relative to the others at all. 9, 10, Verstappen finds a bit. And then again, look at the high speed. 4 tenths? Oh, over 2 tenths from turn 12 to turn 15. So, Vasseur said they lost 3 tenths into turn 1. If Vasseur wants buy me a coffee subscription, I'll send it to him. And he'll probably get answers quicker than We Are Checking. I'm just kidding. I think those guys are probably doing a good job. And the We Are Checking is actually a very good reply that you can give drivers. So, I'm just taking the piss. I don't think I'm better than those guys, honestly. I think they've got a very interesting car, which brings us to our next point in F1 Stats Guru's comment. It's really hard to say, and I think as an anecdote, I think you could say, yeah, maybe the Ferrari is good or is struggling a little bit in crosswind or windy conditions, because one of the things is like wind tunnels. I don't quote me on this, but I think like 10 years ago, Formula One wind tunnels went up to 6 degrees of yaw. So the wind could move, the car basically rotates on the belt, and you go up to 6 degrees of yaw, or 8 degrees. Maybe some of the tunnels now are getting up to 10 or 12. I don't know. And there's other tricks you can do. It just depends on the section of your tunnel, the model size. I think everybody's on, was it 50 or 50, 40%, 50%? I don't know. They've changed that in the last 10 years. I'm talking out of my ass because I'm not an aerodynamicist, but over the last 10 years, everybody's migrated to most people running the largest model scale that's possible to run in a tunnel. And then it depends on the tunnel itself, how much yaw you can get out of the car. But let's say that these measurements in the tunnel go up to 10 degrees. It's 60% confirmed. Okay. Yeah, pretty much. I think everybody's running 60% now because a lot of people are sharing tunnels. But let's say that your belt can only go up to 10 or 12 degrees of yaw. If you have super huge wind on track, you can see 20 degrees of crosswind yaw. And then the other problem that you have on top of that, which is a really nuanced thing that I don't think a lot of people appreciate, and it might be over a lot of people's heads, is think about it this way. Imagine you've got a field of wind blowing at you this way, and a car's going through it, but the car is rotating through that wind, because the car, if you put a camera looking at the car top down, you would see the car doing this as it goes through a corner, right? But imagine the wind is this way. That means that you have a different angle of incidence of wind on the front of the car versus the rear of the car, and that varies as a function of the length of the car. That is something that you cannot do in a wind tunnel. So that's one of the big tricks about Formula One aerodynamics and race car aerodynamics, is the fact that your tools actually cannot physically model reality. So that's when you have to get really good into understanding. Forget the wind tunnel, forget CFD. What is the car doing on track? That is the truth. Right? So, I think I went on a huge tangent there. I'm not going to look at Gasly's lap. Gasly, very similar trend to everybody else that we've mentioned. Gasly, good, turn 6, 7 in the middle. But yeah. Now, this is an interesting one. I want to look at Perez's lap, because I thought, you know what, Perez didn't have the commitment in high speed. I think looking back to Suzuka, that early section, the S's, he was struggling quite a bit there. But this wasn't the case. So let's look at Perez's exit from Q2. I do believe these are the correct laps. I double checked, but I was also in a hurry to get this so I could come live and chat with you guys. Perez really strong on the brakes into turn 1, loses on the exit. Strong on the brakes into turn 4, loses through 4, 5. Perez strong on the brakes into turn 6, loses on the exit. Are you noticing a pattern here? Perez through the high-speed corners, maybe loses a tenth. And then Perez has a shocking final corner. I think this is something that I've seen last year with Perez at a couple of races. And I will caveat this slightly to say that this could be a data offset issue, but I don't think it is. I think there's not a whole lot of holes in his data, so I think this is valid. I think on one hand, it looks very much like Perez was trying to find all of his lap time on the entry to the corners, and as a result of that, losing out. And I don't think that's a normal thing. Like a lot of drivers, is like you have to judge the grip on the way into the corner, and if you get slightly out of sync with that and you don't appreciate that you're actually losing, you need to give up the entry and focus on the exit. Some drivers really always focus on the entry. And a quick answer to Zachary Fernandez's question: why is the wind tunnel limited in terms of degrees of yaw? It is not limited in degrees of yaw, I believe, from a regulation point of view. It's literally a hardware compromise. So the wind tunnel working section where the walls are, if it's a walled tunnel, so I don't know if anybody uses open sections. I'm not aerodynamicist. I know what I've seen. I've seen a couple of wind tunnels. But it's basically a hardware limitation. Size of the tunnel, size of the model, and then the platform. But I think the limitation is the tunnel size and the model size. I will ask an anonymous aerodynamicist, and I'll come back to you. Why can't those idiots focus on both entry and exit? That's a great question for you. Which team has the best wind tunnel? I'm not sure, but let's keep rocking on with this, and then we'll come back and have a little bit of a chat. But yeah, that's a great point. Max basically has a great compromise of not taking too much of a bite out of the entry of the corners, and getting a good drive on the exit. That being said, Max was not particularly excellent in 6 and 7, but it was clearly good enough. Let's look at Stroll's exit, because I mean, you guys saw the video, and I'm not here. This is not a drama channel, but Stroll was absolutely royally pissed off in the interviews. He was shockingly slow. He had a disagreement with his physio, gave him a little push. Interesting. But let's look at the telemetry and see what the data tells us. So Stroll's in red. By turn 6, Stroll and Alonso are within a tenth. And then Stroll loses so much time out of 6. And then from there, his lap just looks absolutely cooked. And I would not be surprised to see that Stroll had a severe bout of wheel spin or sliding somewhere. Because this, to me, like if you're neck and neck through the first half of a lap, I mean, he's not that far off. Like by here, he's a tenth off of Alonso at turn 6, apex, right? And then all of a sudden, he loses all of the grip in the world through these 2 corners. He either basically bozoed the corners, had a huge wheel spin and overheated the tires, or yeah, I think those are the only 2 options, because he's bad through turn 6. He loses, if the telemetry's lined up properly, he loses half a second exiting turn 6. He then loses another 0.2 exiting 7, breaks about even through 9-10, and then he loses 0.2 into turn 12-13, and then loses another 0.2 in the final corner. But I don't think we need to pick that too far apart. I mean, that's not to kick a man while he's down, but yeah, that's not particularly surprising. I think the next one that I want to look at before we get into anything else, yeah, it's a big offset. The last thing I want to look at is just Leclerc versus Sainz. And here's the way to frame Leclerc versus Sainz. Basically, they weren't fast enough today, and there was not that much between them. Sainz got knocked out. Leclerc made it through to Q3. I don't think there was a massive underperformance. I don't think there was a massive disaster. I think they were just close, and the car was not particularly good around the circuit. So let's look at what that looks like. Leclerc's in blue, Sainz is in red. I know it's 2 Ferraris, but one of them has to be blue. So Leclerc's blue, Sainz is in red. Leclerc a tenth up. We're talking a tenth. Think about some of the scales that we saw. We've seen scales that are plus or minus a second. Now we're looking at 0.2 overall. So this is not that big of a deal. A tenth up by turn 4-5. Then Sainz gains down to turn 6-7. then Leclerc gains through 9-10, and then so on. Like realistically, if Sainz had put together a slightly better turn 16, what is that? Let's as a 10th. So let's go look at the sheets. What happens to Q2 times? If Sainz had improved by a 10th, he would have been ahead of Yuki. And he would have done better than Bottas. So yeah, final corner, like realistically, I mean, they were neck and neck, and it was the final corner. Sainz could have been into Q3, but honestly, I don't really feel like that made much difference. The Ferrari was not particularly strong today. And then looking through the other teammates compares of people that were both in Q3, here's an interesting one. Yeah, so Sainz washed. Yeah, exactly what that means. I know, I understand the sarcasm note. Here's an interesting one. The McLarens were the exact same story. Yes, they both lost their fastest laps, but these are the fastest laps. As I discussed before, why I've used them for analysis. There's a little bit of an issue with Piastri's data here. Piastri's in red. But like, honestly, you know, we a 10th up, a 10th down. I mean, that's realistically, that's a tight qualifying lap. If you're moving within a 10th of your teammate throughout the entire lap. And again, the difference, Norris, you know, a 10th up, final corner. But I mean, it's not that big of a deal. Like a 10th. But look at the difference in a 10th. Like we can hardly see it. It's like 3 kilometers an hour, 2 kilometers an hour, and that's how important low speed cornering performance is. You know. So I feel like that's like a really good TLDR. And what have we got? 30 minutes of a discussion. I think that's pretty good. I've got a question for everybody before we get to the little chatting and Q&A. And if you're listening, watching this back later, thank you so much. And do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the Break F1 channel. And if you're interested in more data, I always post these things on Twitter and, of course, the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. But I've got a question for everybody who's in the live stream now. Would you listen to a discussion like this if I did a slightly better job of talking about the telemetry or simplified it a bit in audio format? Because I really think that there's a lot of people that like want to consume this stuff, but they don't have time to sit in front of the phone and watch a video. So I feel like I could definitely help give you guys more access to this stuff if I put it on a Spotify, Apple Music, and stuff like that. And there's a lot of content I think would be favorable for you guys. So yeah, I think a lot of people prefer the visuals, and I get that too, but I feel like there's a lot of people that would enjoy that. So and that being said, I think there's a lot of stuff that's really specific to Break F1, like conversations with other engineers and technical people that I'd also like to do in audio and video format. But yeah, I think for the most part, I think the first, like the TLDR is pretty good. And then I think when we get into the nuts and bolts of it, yeah, we might lose the audio audience a little bit. AKS Base says, hey Blake, I just want to say big thank you. You made me realize motorsport is a proper career that I can pursue, and now I've submitted my university application to do just that. Congratulations, man. I'd love to see that, and I'd love to hear it. Best of luck. So let's talk about qualifying. What did you guys think of this session? I mean, talking points, Ferrari pretty win sensitive, Lance struggling. I don't think there's too interested. But what are you guys thinking? Any thoughts or questions? And what are you guys thinking about tomorrow? I think everybody's got a new soft that's likely to make Q3. I think a lot of people in the back definitely burned up tires. Alonso did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Alonso used 6 softs, so Alonso does not have a new soft. And that's good because they did change the tire rules. That it didn't say you have to use a new soft in sprint qualifying 3. Mercedes. What about Mercedes? Realistically, third fastest performance outright, clearly ahead of Aston Martin. Both Russell and Hamilton very equally matched. So I think that means that they should be very competitive and a threat tomorrow, especially if one of them alternates strategy. They'll cover both ends of it. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, honestly, I'm not too excited tomorrow about the sprint qualifying. If it's a hot track temperature in sprint qualifying, you probably will see some more overheating and teams getting thrown for a loop. You know, like they've got such little preparation already. I don't feel like any more chaos will shake the field up that much further. So Are the teams outside of contention for the sprint race going to use tire test tomorrow? I think the sprint race will be most teams' opportunity to gather high fuel data, because very few teams ran high fuel in free practice one. If I go back and look, I think it was just a couple. Mercedes kind of ran like a medium fuel load. They didn't even run high fuel. McLaren's chances on Sunday, well, I think their chances are good. The problem is that they're starting 6th and 10th, and they're not that much faster than the cars around them in terms of top speed. So the fact that they have performance in hand through the corners, if they're similarly matched in top speed, they may or may not have a significant chance unless they're on a different tire strategy to the cars ahead of them. So I think the start will be super critical for everybody, but especially the McLarens. Mercedes should do okay on the start, but I don't expect a whole lot. I think Alonso will sit put. Venkatesh Reddy says, how did Aston Martin have so much top speed all of a sudden? You should go watch my video about Aston Martin. It was my last proper video on the channel. I go into a huge deep dive into Aston Martin's performance and how it changed and what that means and how all of that works together. I think you'll find that super interesting. I think I would definitely recommend that. I think honestly, if I was to put my my hat on tomorrow, I would say, or on Sunday, I would say Verstappen, either Mercedes, either McLaren, and maybe if Alonso's cheeky and races well, he could be up there. Because in terms of top speed, Alonso has the top speed to overtake. He's got what has he got? Probably a 3-4 kilometer an hour advantage over Norris. So is that enough? Not sure. Is it useful? Possibly. But I think I'm kind of thinking Verstappen, either Mercedes, either McLaren, and then maybe a chance at Alonso up there. So another great, if you guys aren't following F1 Stats Guru on Twitter and Instagram, I highly recommend his super informative, as you probably can guess, statistical analysis. But a great point there. 95% of the passes in 2021 Qatar race were done on the main straight after lap 1. There were no changes for position on lap 1, I do believe, when I was looking at that. Sainz and Perez will have their work cut out, especially with tire deg. That's an interesting question, and I'm not sure what tire deg is going to do. And if you're looking at it from the team's perspective, they're not going to really know about the tire deg, because if you go look back at the free practice 1 data, there was no deg because the track was improving faster than the tires were dropping off. So that'll be super interesting. The thing, Adam's got an interesting point. So I think McLaren and Mercedes are relying on high-speed corners this weekend in races so they don't get overtaken on the main straight. The problem is, leading onto the main straight is a medium-speed corner, and you're not going to be doing any overtaking anywhere except for the main straight, going back to F1 Stats Guru's point. Like, most of the passes are on the main straight. So cars like the Mercedes-powered cars are all very similar. Arash asks a good question. Does the track get faster during the race? It likely will. The track will likely grip up through the race. We also don't have any support series here. So every night, the track effectively gets sand washed a bit, and it will reset to some degree. And I don't think we have support series rubbering in the track, really. Talking forward to the race, like, honestly, I know it's a bad attitude from me, but I'm just not interested in the sprint race. I'm more focused on the main event. So if we want to talk quickly about sprint qualifying in the sprint race, I will be live tomorrow to watch the sprint race. I'll look at the data from sprint qualifying and do a very short report on it, but I'm just not that excited about it, honestly. I hate to say it. Last year's race, let's talk about last year's race quickly. Or sorry, 2021's race. It's been a hot minute. This is 2021's race in terms of tire strategy. And I don't know how the compounds relate to 2 years ago, but basically everybody it was a predominantly two-stop. Two-stop was the hot strategy. One-stoppers, I think Alonso did all right with that podium on a one-stopper, but realistically the hot strategy was a two-stop. I'm not sure that the soft will be favored on Sunday. I really don't know, and I'm really not sure. I think the teams are really thinking about their historical knowledge, and then what tracks this is most similar to. But I think this is quite an interesting one. How does tire rubbering influence tire strategy? Asks Madmar for life. As the grip goes up, it really depends. Like if grip goes up so that your pace goes up, you increase tire energy, and you could increase deg. If the track grip is super low, you'll slide the tires a lot, and that will increase deg. I think a lot of it's about energy into the tire, and that's about not sliding the tire excessively or having snaps or moments. Some cars may be more or less prone to snaps and moments, especially in high wind conditions. I lost my train of thought. And the other one is the faster you go, the more energy you put into the tires. That's kind of it. So yeah, the track has been resurfaced. The track will continue. So my understanding is when they lay tarmac, all the little stones have a layer of bitumen on the top of them that eventually gets worn off as they're abraded over. But these fresh pieces of tarmac that are laid have a coating on them that when they bind together, or maybe it's not the thing that binds them together, but over time you wear the top of that stone off and reveal something under that which has higher grip. So that's currently happening throughout this weekend, where some circuits, the tarmac's 5 years old, it's bleached to hell, and it's been run over a zillion times by hundreds of thousands of race cars. We don't have that on this track. This track is still ramping up. We had, like we said, we had over 3 seconds of improvement. Mohammed Hussein says lower grip will cause graining, more grip will cause thermal degradation. Lower grip and graining are not necessarily directly related, and graining has a lot to do with the frequency of. I get super lost. It has a lot to do with the surface type A, and then basically also thermal misdistributions through the tire. More grip will cause thermal degradation. More grip can cause thermal degradation. Yeah, I think graining has a lot to do with the forces and the surface interaction, the temperature, the roughness. I really need to talk to a super tire guru about that, because I actually hate commenting about that, because it's one of those things. It's like I think I know it, and then I start to try to explain it. And my old boss had a really great saying. Thanks, James. It's like teaching, when you have to teach and explain stuff, it identifies gaps in your knowledge. And I'm like, I actually don't have any problem admitting when I don't know something particularly well, because that gives me an indicator to go study it and try to learn more. And I will say there's a lot of people that talk about tires that don't know about tires. And there's a lot of people that work in tires that aren't particularly good at tires. The tire deg is it's an interesting one. The tire degradation is more of a predicting it with a model is difficult. Observing it analytically and then seeing the variables that influence that. If you want to master something, teach it from Feynman. I've read all of his books, Lucas. They're so enjoyable, and I really want to read them again. What a brilliant mind. Great books. Very interesting person, and so wise. But yeah, I think that's really it. Here's a good one. Now, Zachary Fernandez, last question, not F1 related, but what are your thoughts on Aston Martin's newly announced Valkyrie LMH program and how it might impact the F1 program? I think you will see them ramping up, but also we don't know who's going to develop and run that car. They might just say, because they've already effectively got the Valkyrie, and the original intention of the Valkyrie was that it would be an LMH car. And then they backed out of that once they decided to go full beans on the F1 project. Now they're going in on it. So I feel like there's a lot of things that are prepared for that. And I don't know who is going to develop that car. If it's going to be Aston Martin's side projects group from the F1 team, if it's going to be, somebody like Multimatic or one of those types of companies. So let's see. Speedy comparison between Logan and Alex. It's the closest they've been all season. Say less. Pog from Tire Black Magic to a Feynman quote. Yep. Will Nui be having anything to do with that? I do not think that Red Bull, Advanced Technologies, and Aston have any working relation right now. I don't think they do. I don't know anything, but I don't think they do. Right, we wanted to see Logie Bear and Albon. Oh, do I not have it? No. No, I don't have it, dude. Hey, if you're in the Discord link is in the description below. Join the Discord and I'll post it in the F1 data section. Or message me on Twitter and I'll fire it over to you. But yeah. Bonus Justice says, not Qatar related, but would you have any reservations about Mexico Grand Prix for a first time over an Austin race? The only thing I will say, every time I've been to Mexico, it has been fantastic. The only concern from a foreigner that doesn't know the area, if you don't speak the language, there are lots of places in Mexico City that are relatively not safe to be. If you're local, you know how to navigate that, I think, quite well. I'm trying to be sensitive to that, but 100% that is the case. Like, when you're driving to the circuit in Mexico, our taxi driver was like deliberately not going down certain roads because he just said muertos, we don't go that way. So I think that's it. But I think it's a great city. Make sure to take some Imodium because a lot of people, there's the tap water there is quite bad, and a lot of people get stomach issues every year that we went there. But other than that, Mexico's the atmosphere, the fans, the stadium section is phenomenal. I've thoroughly enjoyed going to Mexico every year. Food's fantastic. People are super friendly. I've loved it. But I will say, yeah, safer than a Walmart in Texas, probably, based. But I'm gonna wrap up now. But I will see you guys in Austin if anybody's out there. I will try to line up something where we can, if you guys are in somewhere in the track, somewhere where we can say hello and meet up. I'd love to say hi to a lot of you guys. Last year I was really nervous about that because I don't like I'm good at chatting with people, but like when there's a lot of people, I get kind of overwhelmed. But I'm like, we'll figure it out. But I will be probably live tomorrow for the sprint race watch along, and I will also be live for the Grand Prix on Sunday. Austin's view of the track is better. I think, Corey, I think you're correct. I am biased because I'm Texan, but I love going to Austin. I love the circuit. Yeah, that's it. Adam, thanks so much. Sabu, I appreciate you as well. And Matthews, love it. Flea, thank you, man. Seriously. Let's meet at the Red Bull Hospitality in Austin. I'll see you there. Wink, wink. Are you at turn 17? Question. You son of a gun. Coda is excellent. Yeah, seriously. But guys, gals, I appreciate you guys hanging out. I appreciate the thoughtful questions, the interactions. Shout out to F1 Stats Guru, absolute legend. And I appreciate you guys coming through to hang out and chat on these streams. And I hope you find value in it. Don't be sure to check out the Buy Me a Coffee link. There's lots of free stuff. You don't have to subscribe. You don't have to join the members because I appreciate that's something that's behind a paywall. I think there's good value in it. But if you follow at least, I always post stuff. And if you want to stay in the loop, I'll let you know when there's a new video. I'll let you know when I post a free article. And I do my best to make sure that I'm always sharing stuff to get new people interested in the data and expose it. I don't want to hide everything behind a paywall, but it's a great way for me to take a lot of this hard work and these hours of work that I put into doing these analysis reports, and then sharing those with people and feed my adorable cats. I don't know where they're at right now. But be sure to hit that like button on the YouTube stream. Tell your friends about it. Thank you for hanging out. I appreciate you guys. We'll see you tomorrow for the sprint qualifying race. Y'all be good to each other. Be safe. Be friendly on Twitter. And don't take everything too seriously. Just have a good time. And make some new friends. All right? See you guys soon.